Welcome to everyone on the Shadows of the Unknown USA channel. I hope you are all doing well and staying on the good side of things. It's because of your love that we come back to this YouTube channel. We want you to stay updated constantly on the stories we share. Today, we will tell you another story, and for that reason, please subscribe to our channel. If you enjoy our stories, don't forget to like, comment, and share. To always stay updated, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I hope today's episode will be enjoyable for you. Let's begin today's episode, and I hope you will stay with us from start to finish. The first story of today's episode is about Douglas, who has returned after a long time. Let's not waste time and jump straight into the story that Douglas has sent us. I will read it exactly as he wrote it. I am Douglas, one of the moderators of Shadows of the Unknown USA, speaking from Charleston, West Virginia. First of all, I sincerely apologize to all of you. Due to health issues and complications from my job, I was away for a long time, but can I really ignore the love you all have for Shadows of the Unknown USA? Of course not, which is why I have returned with a new story, which I collected from an acquaintance. In my search for ghost stories, I met people from various professions. This led me to meet a respected person from a certain community named Austin, from New Jersey. I won't go into how we met, but today I will share a tragic chapter from his life. Today's story is about Mr. Liam. I will try to present it in his own words and apologize in advance for any unintended mistakes. Liam speaks. I am Liam, from Hampton. I am a father at the church. I entered this line of work almost on a whim, thinking I could help people, and by Jesus' will, fight against evil. But I never imagined that this work would become a curse for my life. In 2019, I was practicing Ruqya spiritual healing. Alongside learning, I was also practicing. My mentor, Adam, was an elder, around 50 years old. One afternoon, after finishing my studies, I was resting in Jesus' room, taking a nap for a while. Suddenly, I was awakened by a knock on the door. When I went outside, I saw Father Roy and Father Bobby had come to see me. When I asked why they came, they said Father Lucas had called for me and that there was an urgent matter I needed to attend to. They also said I should get ready and then go to Father Lucas's room. As per Father Roy's instructions, I wore clean clothes, applied a tar, perfume, and left for Father Lucas's room. When I arrived and knocked on the door, Father Lucas greeted me warmly, invited me in, and asked me to sit beside him. He then said, "Listen, my son, we have a task to do today. But before that, I need to tell you something. Don't act emotionally. Rely on your teachings, surrender yourself to Jesus, and never accept any reward or compensation for your work. If you don't follow this, you will be held accountable on the day of judgment." I agreed and asked Father what the task was. He said, "I don't know the full story, but there is a girl with a problem. Her father has been coming to the church gate for the past 10 to 12 days seeking help for his daughter. 2 days ago, I called him and asked why he kept coming. He told me his daughter, Emma, is very ill, and he believes she is possessed by an evil jinn. When I asked him how he was certain that she was possessed, he said that every night, a hissing sound, like that of a snake, could be heard from her room. Despite searching, they couldn't find the source of the sound. Every night, the girl is physically attacked with marks on her hands, feet, back, and other places. When asked, she says the snake won't let her live. I asked the girl's father what this snake was, but he couldn't give me any concrete information. He was practically begging me to help his daughter, so we're going to see what's really happening. I told Father, "What are you saying, Master? What could you possibly see? Maybe the girl is just making excuses to avoid studying." Father sternly reminded me to be respectful, explaining that the girl had already completed her master's degree. I apologized to Father and began thinking that perhaps her family was pressuring her into marriage, and she was reacting to that. Or maybe she didn't want to marry someone, or perhaps it was something else entirely. I didn't really know what was going on. Following Father's orders, we eventually reached our destination. When Father called Rima's father on the mobile, he came to us after about 5 to 7 minutes and took us to their house. I swear, the moment I stepped inside, chills ran through my body. My mind whispered, "What kind of devil's den have you walked into?" Rima's father brought us in and offered us a seat on the sofa. We were served tea, biscuits, and water, but Father strictly forbade me from drinking even a drop. Though Rima's father was a bit disheartened, he assumed Father had a reason for it and let the matter rest there. Afterward, we asked Rima's father for permission to meet her, and he took us to her room. Rima was already prepared and was brought before us. Father glanced around Rima's room. On the right side, there was a bookshelf, on the left was her bed, behind it a study table, and in front, a chair to sit on. To the right, there was a large window, and in front, a balcony. Everything seemed neat, but it felt like no light ever entered this house, as if there was no blessing upon it, like a curse was looming over it. Father sat in front of Rima, and she greeted him with a salam. Father returned the greeting and signaled to me. I asked Rima's mother to press Rima's pinky finger gently. Father then began softly muttering verses in his own way. Within moments, Rima began growling while catching her breath, but soon she became utterly calm. Father then asked her, "What's your name?" Rima responded, "You've learned the names of many jinns in your life, so why not skip learning mine? Let's chat instead." This response left both Father and me utterly stunned. We had never heard such an insolent jinn speak this way before. Father asked, "What story?" Rima began speaking. "I will tell you everything. I hide nothing because I love playing by showing my cards. And even though you'll know, you won't be able to do anything. I won't tell you my name. If you can, find out yourself. This girl is my beloved. From childhood, she has worshipped me. She had a doll, and she used to draw my pictures on it. Those were my images. She used to draw my pictures and offer them to me. She pulled me toward her. How will you stop me from coming to her? She can neither die nor live of her own will. She will die when I wish it." Father, now angry, asked, "Who do you think you are? Life and death are in the hands of Allah. Who are you to control death?" The jinn, in a hungry voice, replied, "Silence! She does not believe in Allah. She opposes him." With this, Rima fainted. Before she passed out, she said, "Everyone knows me as the serpent god." I stepped out of Rima's room and asked her parents how this all started. Rima's mother explained that Rima had completed her master's degree last year. They were a middle-class family, and they had started discussing her marriage after her exams were over. Since then, Rima's condition had deteriorated. The night they brought up marriage, Rima had gone to her mother's room and said she couldn't sleep, claiming to hear snake sounds around her. When her mother went to Rima's room to investigate, she too heard the same hissing sound, but they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. From that day on, Rima stopped sleeping. Whether day or night, whenever she tried to sleep, she'd have nightmares and scream out in terror. Out of fear of those nightmares, Rima stopped wanting to sleep altogether. They took her to doctors for checkups, but nothing abnormal was found. They even brought a local father to talk to Rima, but after that, there were no updates. The father had resigned from his job for unknown reasons and disappeared. I thought maybe the girl didn't want to marry, so she was pretending. But Rima's mother dispelled that idea. She said that when the topic of marriage came up, Rima had openly declared that she was in a relationship with a senior from her university for the past 2 years. Both families were aware of this, and neither had any objections to the match. But fate played a cruel hand. Although Rima acted normally during the day, at night she would claim she didn't even recognize the boy anymore. The boy would call me, crying, asking what was wrong with Rima. What could I say? One night, when the boy's family came to formally see Rima, the boy heard hissing snake sounds in his room. His family, however, didn't pay much attention to it. We set the engagement date, but 2 weeks before the engagement, the boy suddenly fell ill with a fever. He never recovered. Poor boy, may Allah forgive us. He passed away just 2 days before the engagement. Before he died, he said he was poisoned by the venom of the serpent god. Meanwhile, my daughter keeps murmuring about snakes. I can neither marry her off nor keep her in our house. Father, she is our only child. We have no one else. Please help us. After receiving all this information, we told Rima's mother to bring her to the church next Friday afternoon. They agreed. As we were about to leave, a loud thunderclap struck, shaking us to our core. Just as we were heading out, we heard hissing and laughter from Rima's room. In a voice that sounded like a snake, she hissed, "Beware." To find out everything that happened with Rima, I agreed with Father that night, had dinner, and went to bed. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of hissing snakes. I was completely shocked. It was the same trouble again. As I tried to get out of bed, I heard a voice in the wind say, "Warn, Father, or you will end up like the previous 12." I almost lost consciousness, but then there was a knock at the door, and I snapped back to reality. When I opened the door, Father was standing there. He hurriedly entered my room, closed the door, and said, "Things are not as simple as we thought. There's more to this story. Now tell me everything from the beginning, no matter what." I told Father about the strange event that had just happened, and he said, "There's more hidden here that we don't know about. I also heard hissing in my room just a while ago." That night, I was so terrified I couldn't close my eyes. I know many will wonder how someone with my temperament could be so scared, but unless someone experiences fear the way I did, they will never understand. You can call me a coward, but I know what I went through that night. Anyway, the next day I set off to find out the real story of Rima's life. What were we missing? My first destination was the local church near Rima's house. When I inquired about Father, I received news that I was neither expecting nor prepared for. Father had already died from a fever that lasted 10 to 12 days. There had even been an announcement in the area about his death. He had a son named Tom, who also died from the same fever about a month before Father passed away. Shocked, I left the church and called Father to inform him of everything I had just learned. Father said, if they made an announcement in the area, Rima's family must know this. So why did they lie and say Father had simply left? They're hiding something. Go back to their house and find out. Following Father's instructions, I went back to Rima's house and somewhat angrily said, "How much longer are you going to lie? Don't you fear Jesus? Don't you want to save your daughter? The father from your local church died from the same fever as Rima's fiancé. So why did you lie?" They were silent. After thinking for a moment, I recalled the voice from the previous night that said my fate would be like that of the 12 others. Taking a chance, I asked them, just like Father, have 11 or 12 others also died in the same way? Why didn't you tell us? Rima's father was startled and asked, "How did you know that?" This confirmed my suspicion. We weren't fighting against an ordinary devil, we were fighting against death itself. "Oh Allah, have you written death at the hands of this demon? Forgive us, Allah, forgive us." Rima's father made me sit on their sofa and agreed to tell me the full story. He was ready to share the names of all the victims and how they died. As he spoke, chills ran down my spine. I had heard of people attempting ruqya, spiritual healing, but this time they couldn't even perform it. Even though they tried, they failed. Now listen to the terrifying story Rima's father told me. Victim 1. The local father had come to see Rima. He spoke with her and then sat with her. As soon as he sat down, the serpent god manifested within Rima's body. There was a great deal of conflict between them. At one point, Father decided to perform ruqya and informed us that he would perform it 3 days later for my daughter. However, the serpent god warned Father not to prepare for it. He said that if Father proceeded, he would lose the thing most precious to him. The next morning, when I went to talk to Father in his room, I learned that he had gone home because his son was gravely ill. That was the last we heard from him. A month later, we heard on the loudspeakers that Father had also passed away. When the news was announced, a sharp laugh pierced my ears from Rima's room. After hearing the news, Rima said, "One is down, the next one's turn is coming." Victim 2. As we realized this was a demon from another religion, we sought help from a Hindu priest. I got his contact from a Hindu colleague and went to see him. His gathering was crowded with people. He had never failed in his work. For some reason, when he saw my daughter, he called her over and said, "Child, who is this with you?" Then he said, "We will need to perform a 7-day yajna, ritual sacrifice." He placed Rima on the asana, seat, and hit her on the waist with a cane. Rima roared like a tiger at the priest and said, "Raman, how dare you lay a hand on my wife? Go ahead, make your preparations, and I'll see how powerful you really are." Raman laughed and dismissed the demon's words. He told us to come back in 3 days to start the ritual. When we returned 3 days later, the priest sat and summoned the demon. The demon said, "Raman, your phone is ringing. Answer it. Answer the call." As soon as Raman answered the phone, he rushed out of the room. We later found out that his pregnant wife had drowned in a pond. We waited 15 to 20 days before returning to Raman's gathering. When we finally met him, he was crying and said, "Brother, forgive me. This fight is not my battle. I cannot do this." Raman then started coughing like a sick man. We learned he had been running a fever for 5 or 6 days. A week later, my colleague informed me that Raman the priest had died. I was in deep trouble. Where could I go? Who could help us? The marks of torment were visible on my daughter's body. She couldn't sleep. She was going to die. What could we do? While thinking about all of this, I found information about a man named Father Richard from Oklahoma. Victim 3. Father Richard worked from his own home. He had a large room where he would receive patients. When I took my daughter to see him, he whispered something in her ear and blew on her. A woman came and held my daughter's hand, and Father said, "Keep the connection intact." Suddenly, my daughter started hitting herself with immense force, so hard that her cheeks began to bleed. Father didn't stop his work and continued talking to the demon, asking, "Who are you?" The demon replied, "I am the serpent god. I am Mushi." Father said, "Yes, I know your name, but I didn't ask for that. I asked, 'Who are you?'" The demon warned, "If you push me too far, I will kill the girl right now. Watch this." And Rima continued hitting herself repeatedly. Father asked the demon what it wanted. The demon said it wanted 7 kilograms of sweets, 7 kilograms of rice, and a goat offering. After that, it would leave Rima. After some bargaining, we felt a little relieved, thinking that everything would soon be fine. 2 days later, I went to the market to buy a goat, but when I brought it to Father, I learned that he had fallen ill with a severe fever. Upon hearing this, my throat went dry. What was happening? Why was it happening? Had the demon deceived us? When I returned home, I heard Rima saying from her room, "There were so many rituals to bind me, but if they had defeated me, I would have had to leave. That's why I tricked them by saying I would go." She continued, "Father is gone now. I've finished him." I realized what fate awaited Father. I never searched for him again, knowing what was written in his destiny. That day, I slapped Rima hard and asked her what she wanted. The demon replied, "I want Rima. I will never let her go." I told Rima's father, "Please stop. I don't want to hear the death stories of others." But Rima's father insisted, saying he wanted to share one last incident. I allowed him to speak, and he began telling the story. He said he couldn't remember the person's name, but they were Marma, an indigenous group. His daughter had helped this Marma man's daughter during an exam as a volunteer at the university. After that, the Marma man became very fond of my daughter, and his daughter started calling Rima her big sister. He would often call me to check on us. One day, he told me that he had seen my daughter a few days ago, and she looked like she was heading somewhere. Hearing this, I couldn't hold back my tears, and I told him everything. He then mentioned that there was someone among the Marma people who could help for a very low cost, just $2. He said this person could do the work. Grasping at this ray of hope, I took my daughter to see the healer. The healer lived about 2 kilometers away from the Marma man's house, but it took us 3 hours to get there. Do you know why? As soon as we set off, the entire city was covered in black clouds, and it started pouring rain. It felt like the car would flip over at any moment. Rima was laughing inside the car, saying, "If you take me there, things will get even worse." Finally, we reached the healer's house. When the healer arrived, Rima spat on him and laughed, saying, "There, I've poisoned you. Now die." The healer told us to leave the house. 10 minutes later, he came back and said, "Don't ever call me again. Never come here. This is not something anyone in this city can handle." On our way back, the Marma man looked at Rima and said, "I curse you. You've been tormenting this girl, and you'll be destroyed." Rima replied, "Oh, really? Let's see who gets destroyed." When we reached his house, he told us, "I'll take you to someone else tomorrow." Upon hearing this, Rima went up to him, grabbed his throat, and said, "You won't stop, will you? Fine, I'll stop you." The next morning, when we woke up, we found the Marma man bedridden with a fever. He asked us to leave and said he would call us when he recovered. A few days later, when we called to check on him, we learned that he had passed away. Hearing all this from Rima's father made my throat go dry. Meanwhile, father arrived at Rima's house to begin the ruqya. I begged him not to proceed, saying, "Father, don't do this. There's so much we don't know yet." But father rebuked me, saying, "You fool, is this what I've taught you? You're a coward. Don't you have faith in Allah? You don't need to come. I'll do the ruqya alone. Leave." I couldn't stop him, and I regret it deeply. That ruqya turned out to be the last one of father's life. Listen to what happened that day, and why I wanted to embrace my own death. You'll know everything gradually. We've come to the end now, haven't we? No, not at all. We're not even halfway through. So listen, father brought out his blessed water and other tools to start the ruqya on Rima. Her father, mother, and I held her because as soon as she saw father, she became so restless that we couldn't control her. The ruqya began. Father recited verses, and Rima was in pain. Father had almost defeated the demon when it said, "Stop, father, stop. I can't take it anymore. I'm leaving, but I won't stop." Father responded, saying he would either trap the demon in a bottle or kill it. Hearing this, the demon begged for mercy, saying it would leave. I didn't describe the details of the ruqya to you because it was so intense it might have overwhelmed you. The ruqya was completed, and I returned after checking on Rima. The next morning, Rima's father called me. "Father, Rima is acting insane again." My phone slipped from my hand. I rushed to father's room and found him shivering with fever. What happened? Had the demon deceived us this way? I rushed to Rima's house, which was the main reason I wanted to die, and the biggest mistake I made. I went to her room, grabbed her hand in anger, and asked, "How many more lives will you take? Who are you? Tell me your name. I won't let you go." Rima gestured for me to bring my ear close to her mouth. When I did, she hissed like a snake and whispered, "May your wish come true. Don't let me go. I've taken the most precious thing from your life. Now, go and find it. I'll keep you alive because you will tell the world who I am and what I do. Remember the name of the serpent god." Then she fainted. Weak and shaken, I left the room. 15 days passed, and not a single night went by where I didn't hear the sound of snakes. I couldn't sleep without hearing it. On the 18th day, father passed away. Before he died, he told me he had a friend in London, and I should go to him and explain everything, that he could help. 7 days after father died, I went to my ancestral home. I couldn't bear the mental pressure anymore. Meanwhile, my wife was pregnant. One afternoon, my wife was heading from the kitchen to the backyard when a cobra bit her. I lost my wife and unborn child. You see, brother, I'm not crying at all. Even 10 to 15 days after their deaths, I still heard the snake's voice one night, saying, "I took your life's precious gem." Now every night, I hear the snake's sound. I can't sleep. What's left for me now? Sometimes I think death would have been a better option, but not now. I fought. I met with someone today, whom I had also met in 2019, searching for a way to defeat the serpent god. The work was delayed due to COVID, but after it ended, we started a new battle with Rima. Do you want to know what happened next? Listen. The next part of the story is so terrifying and heart-wrenching that I cannot share the rest in this episode due to the emotional toll it may take. Please forgive me. You will hear the rest of the story soon, including whether father was able to save Rima, and if she survived, whether the serpent god let her go. Was father able to find the serpent god, or did the serpent king escape after Rima's death? As I reflect on all of this today, I have one final piece of advice. Before you give your child a toy or a doll, please make sure you know exactly what you are buying. Dear listeners, this concludes today's story for you. I don't know how you felt about it. If you liked it, thank you, and if not, please forgive me. Thank you all for your patience, and I wish everyone good health. I am signing off now. With that, he ended his story. I hope we all eagerly await the continuation of the events. I actually wanted to tell father, or if I had known earlier, I would have told him to share the entire story, because there's no point in leaving it incomplete. I believe it would have been better to have the entire story together. Anyway, we hope to get the rest of the story from father soon, and we will be waiting. If father can share it with us by next week, that would be wonderful, and we will try to present the story to you as quickly as possible. For now, we say goodbye and wish you all the best. Welcome once again to everyone, and we are starting with the story sent by Joseph. I hope you all will enjoy these stories. Without further delay, let's jump straight into the incident. Hey, I'm Daniel from Illinois. Today, I'm going to share with you an experience that happened to me personally. I never used to believe in ghosts or these kinds of supernatural stories. When my friends would talk about such things during our hangouts, I would laugh. Is that even possible? I thought. In this modern world, with all this technology, do these things even exist? But one incident forced me to believe in this reality. Anyway, dear listeners, today I'm going to share that story with you. What happened was, whenever I would visit the village, I enjoyed exploring and hanging out with my friends. We loved spending time together. One day during a conversation, I told them that I'm not afraid of ghosts or such things that supposedly happen to people. They laughed and said, "All right, let's do something. We'll take you to a place, an abandoned house. Go there and see if you feel anything or get scared." I agreed. That evening, while we were chatting, I said, "Okay, let's go after sunset." It was around 7 p.m., and there were 3 of us. As we started walking, a black cat suddenly crossed our path. I've heard people say that if a black cat crosses your path, something bad might happen or a danger may arise. But I never believed such things, thinking it's just a superstition people made up. So I told them, "It's fine, let's go." My friends were a bit hesitant, thinking whether it was a good idea to go since it was getting darker and the weather was starting to change. It felt a little eerie with the slight drizzle of rain, but I brushed it off, thinking it wasn't anything to be scared of. We kept chatting as we walked, but I noticed the rain wasn't letting up. It was still drizzling, and after some time, I said, "The rain isn't stopping. Let's just go, no big deal." We walked for about half an hour, and while walking, there weren't many problems, except that the road was a bit muddy, making it difficult to walk. The road was not paved, so it was a bit tricky to keep going. At one point, my friend said, "The house isn't too far now. What are you going to do? You go ahead, and we'll stay here." I replied, "Why should I go alone? You all come with me since you're the ones who suggested it." They were a little scared, but I convinced them to come along. The path to the house was surrounded by thick jungle, and it took about 2 or 3 minutes of walking through dense trees to reach it. The house was isolated, with no other homes nearby. It was. From the people's houses, they mentioned that the place was quite far away, so I said, "Okay, since I'm bringing you all, let's go inside this house." They expressed some hesitation, questioning what I was saying so late at night. When we arrived, I wasn't feeling well at all, and I was a bit uneasy, wanting to know what was going on inside. The environment was unsettling. The room was made of tin, and the gate was old and half open. As soon as I stepped inside, a loud noise startled us. It sounded like something had fallen on the tin roof. We decided that one person should go outside to check if anything had fallen from the sky. It shouldn't have been anything significant, maybe a coconut or something else. The others were scared and hesitant to leave. I went out with our phone lights since the room was completely dark. Outside, we found nothing unusual, which made the situation even creepier. As we were standing there, I noticed a strange smell, almost like something burning, and we heard dogs barking intermittently. We didn't want to stay much longer, so we turned to leave. But as I was about to step back, I felt something sharp like a pin pierce my foot, and I cried out in pain. We decided to sit in front of the house for a while, as I was too weak to walk. The rain was light, but it was still hot, and inside the room, there was a small bed and some dirty rags. There wasn't much else, just a few pieces of paper scattered around. As we were preparing to leave, I noticed a cat that had reappeared, and I started to feel more anxious. It was around 9 p.m., and I sensed that something strange was going on. Just then, someone behind me called out, and I was surprised. I thought it was impossible for anyone to be calling us, since we had been walking away from the house for a few minutes, and in rural areas, it gets eerily quiet by 8 or 9 p.m. I told my friends that it was best not to linger because I felt something unusual was happening. Suddenly, they claimed someone was pulling them from behind, as if a person was gripping their hands tightly. They froze in fear, and I asked what was happening. They insisted that someone was indeed tugging at them. I suggested they head home without me, as I didn't want to cause them any more trouble. Their house was about a 10-minute walk away, and I encouraged them to go ahead. Just then, a man appeared in front of me and called me over. He was wearing a white robe and a turban. He asked where I lived, and I told him it was nearby. Then he instructed me to close my eyes. I was baffled. Why would I close my eyes at night? In that moment, I felt a touch on my forehead, from the crown of my head down to my face, and it was incredibly cold, almost shockingly so. This is just something I believe. After that, I went home, and the people at my house said that there seemed to be a dark mark under my eyes. When I got home and thought about performing ablution, as I was coming from such a place, I went to perform ablution and noticed that the pin that had pierced my foot no longer hurt, or the pain had lessened a lot. A day or two later, we found out that actually, some days before we went there, someone had committed suicide at that spot. A brother had taken his own life there, and since then people avoid going to that place. The gate remains locked. But still, how did we find the gate open that day? Only Allah knows. And the most surprising thing was the man who appeared in front of me and the black cat I saw. The way my friend was pulled back, who were these people? We have no idea, but I feel that in real life, yes, it was a ghostly experience, or a feeling that some entity from another world truly exists. This is real, and I believe that anyone who goes out at night should always carry something that produces fire, whether it's a match or a lighter, because these entities are afraid of that. I didn't have one with me at the time, which is why I couldn't take any such measures. But those who experience such things understand how eerie and strange these events are. A human's hand isn't supposed to be that cold. I mean, their hands were so cold that it really surprised us. Basically, I believe that when that hand touched me from head to chin, maybe only the person doing it knows why, but it felt very weird to me. Then, as I was walking, I felt afraid at that moment. But now I'm fine, and I hope you all enjoyed hearing my story. Welcome back, everyone. A warm welcome to all of you. I hope you are all doing well and in good spirits. Once again, we are going to listen to a story from Matthew. I hope you will enjoy the story. If you do, please stay with us from beginning to end. Support us, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and always stay connected to get all the updates. Subscribe now. Not only that, give us a thumbs up and comment as well. It's a big decision I've made to share this with you on YouTube, so if you could take this little trouble to support us, I'd be grateful. Let's not waste more time and dive into Matthew's story. Hello, listeners. I'm Matthew, and I welcome you all. Today, I'm going to share a story that I actually collected from an uncle of mine, but I've used fictional names for the places and people involved. This is because the place I'm going to talk about is currently in the process of being sold. After my uncle shared this story with me, he didn't want me to present it on any platform, fearing it might affect the sale of the land. He doesn't want to keep the land due to some personal problems. After a lot of requests and obtaining his permission, he agreed, as he is also a fan of ghost stories. So, the story is about a tantric or black magician. However, the person in question may not even be human. You'll understand as you hear the full story. The way my uncle presented it to me, I'll now share it with you. The story is primarily about a tantric. In the village I'm talking about, a sudden appearance of a tantric took place. The village had a large river, and next to the river was a huge banyan tree. One day, the tantric appeared under that banyan tree and stayed there for several days, meditating. People didn't really ask him much or show much curiosity. They assumed he was a wandering ascetic from another village. Since there was a large river near the village, fishermen would come to catch different kinds of fish. It was observed that if someone sat by the riverbank thinking something, the tantric could tell what they were thinking. For example, if someone was thinking of harming someone or using black magic, the tantric would know and say, "Is this what you're thinking about? Is this what you want to do? But will doing this make you happy?" He would present these things to various people, and many of his predictions or insights turned out to be true. People would be shocked when he accurately described their thoughts or intentions. Eventually, it became known that many people sought the tantric's help for black magic to harm others. Gradually, word spread that there was a tantric by the river who could cause harm to people. Despite this, there wasn't much interest in him because the banyan tree was far from the main village and not many people lived nearby. Now, let me skip ahead and introduce the main characters, Mark and George, who are brothers. They were quite respected in the village because they were influential landowners. Mark had been married for about 8 to 10 years, but had no children. They had tried everything, doctors, herbalists, and even went to Canada for treatment, but nothing worked. The main problem, as everyone said, was that it just wasn't possible for them to have children. Now, the age difference between Mark and George was around 8 or 9 years. When George reached the age for marriage, his family arranged for him to get married, and within 2 to 3 years, they had a beautiful baby. Since this was the first baby in the family, both families were very happy and excited, celebrating with great enthusiasm. Mark, who had no children, was particularly fond of George's baby and loved the child dearly. He would always keep the baby close to him. The baby was so pampered by Mark's wife that the child called Mark's wife Big Mom and his own mother Little Mom. The baby loved Mark's wife even more than his biological mother and always wanted to be with her. At first, George's wife didn't mind this, but over time, she started to feel uncomfortable, wondering why her own child was more attached to someone else. Initially, George's wife might have thought that she didn't have to struggle much to raise the baby, but as the child grew older and more aware, Mark's wife became more attached to the baby, and this didn't sit well with George's wife. One day, Mark's wife took the child to a local grocery store to get him something to eat. Next to the store was a small well, and the child, being curious, looked at the well and suddenly slipped and fell in. Fortunately, many people were around the store at that time, and 2 or 3 of them immediately jumped into the well to save the child. The well wasn't very deep, so the child didn't get seriously hurt and was safely pulled out. However, this incident triggered a harsh reaction from George's wife. She got into an argument with Mark's wife, saying, "You don't have your own child, so how could you understand what it feels like if something happens to mine? No matter how much you love my child, he's not yours. If something had happened to him today, you wouldn't understand the pain. You're barren, so how would you know?" Mark's wife was deeply hurt by these words. When Mark came home that night, she shared everything with him, telling him how she had been insulted. Since Mark had just come back from outside, he was already a bit irritable and snapped. "Yes, people will say things. It's been many years, and we still don't have a child. People will talk. We've tried so many times, but it hasn't happened. Why do you care so much about someone else's child? If you keep acting like this, maybe there's no need for you to stay in this marriage. I don't want to hear such things anymore." This led to more arguments, and eventually, Mark's wife couldn't take it anymore. The next morning, when Mark woke up, he did what he usually did. He called out to his wife to ask how many workers had come to the field that day and how things were going in the kitchen. When he didn't get any response after calling several times, he became concerned. He went out to check and saw that the door to a small storeroom where they kept rice and grains was open. Annoyed, he thought, what if a thief had come and stolen everything? When he entered the room, he found his wife had hanged herself and committed suicide. This devastated Mark completely. He couldn't handle the situation. By this time, everyone in the village knew about the tantric and his black magic. Mark, in his broken state, began having dark thoughts. Yes, they have children, and they are so proud of it. My wife is dead, and now it looks like their child will inherit all my property when I die. What will happen to me? There's no point in me getting remarried since I won't be able to have children anyway because the problem is with me. At this point, Mark decides to go to the tantric, occultist. This is where the main story begins. Mark goes to the tantric and tells him everything. The tantric listens and then says, "I can do this for you. I can destroy that child, but there are 2 conditions. The first condition is that I need the child's blood. Not much, just a drop of blood on a piece of cloth. I'll also need a lock of the child's hair. The second condition is that I want to move from my current village to yours because where I am now is too isolated. I need a more secure place to live, and since you have so much land and property, if you let me stay at your place, I will do the job." Mark hesitates and says, "But you have a bad reputation. People say you practice black magic. Right now, you're in a remote area, so no one bothers you, but if you come to my village, people won't accept it because it's more populated by the river." The tantric replies, "I don't care how you bring me there, that's up to you. But if you want me to do this for you, you'll have to meet my two conditions." So Mark goes back to the village and convinces everyone by saying, "This tantric isn't a bad person. Yes, he might do black magic if someone asks him to, but he also does good things. He's very ill, and since I live alone in my house, I'm going to let him stay there until he recovers. He's promised me that he won't do any harmful rituals while he's here." Mark, being a respected man in the village, makes it difficult for people to object. Reluctantly, they agree, and the tantric moves into Mark's house and is given a room to stay in. The tantric warns that no one should ever enter his room. I forgot to mention earlier that the tantric, despite doing black magic and harming people, never accepted money for his services. His only demand was for live offerings: chickens, fish, or birds. If someone brought him a bird, chicken, or goat, it had to be alive. He never asked for money or anything else. Now, Mark starts to think about how he can harm the child. Since it's his brother's child, he feels some guilt but still considers how to go about it. Then, an idea strikes him. He decides to take the child on a bike ride. He plans to deliberately fall off the bike so that the child scrapes his knee or gets hurt on his hand, causing some blood to come out. He thinks that he can collect the blood on a cloth, and as for the hair, that won't be hard to obtain. So, he proceeds with this plan. Mark, pretending that everything was fine, began to act normal with George, saying that whatever had happened was in the past. Previously, he didn't talk much to George or George's wife, but now he showed some affection toward their child. Meanwhile, strange things started happening at Mark's house, where the tantric lived. At night, bizarre sounds would echo, unnatural, frightening noises. People claimed that they saw balls of fire coming out of Mark's house in the middle of the night, and it sounded like many people were talking inside. This began to scare the villagers. Since Mark was a respected figure in the village, no one dared to question him. However, one day he took the child to the market. On the way, he deliberately made the child fall off the bicycle. The child scraped his knee, and a little blood came out. Mark had planned this in advance and wiped the blood with a piece of cloth that he had brought with him. He collected the blood and later gave the cloth to the tantric. The tantric told him that in a few days he would perform the ritual and that Mark should make sure he wasn't home during that time. The tantric assured him that within 3 or 4 days, the child would die. The day arrived, and let me describe what happened. There were 2 beds in George's house. George's wife and their child slept on one bed, while George slept on the other. Sometimes George had to stay out late due to work on his land, and in order not to disturb his wife and child, he often slept on a separate bed. That night, George came home late and went to sleep. Around 2 or 2:30 a.m., he suddenly woke up. He looked over and saw a snake coiled around his wife's body. The snake had foam in its mouth and was staring directly at his wife's face. A demon-like figure, no, it wasn't just a demon, but a malevolent spirit, stood near the child, ready to harm him. This spirit had eyes on the sides of its neck, and its long tongue was hanging out. The figure floated near the child, as if planning to attack. Suddenly, something happened in the village. A fire broke out near a pile of hay, known locally as a pooch, stored after the rice harvest. The fire caused a lot of commotion in the village, and because of the noise, the spirit vanished. George didn't care much about the fire. Instead, he immediately called out to his wife and child to make sure they were all right. After the fire was put out, George told his wife what he had seen. She responded that she had been dreaming of a snake chasing her and their child, and she had been running, trying to save their child. Meanwhile, the tantric was furious with Mark. He accused him of being responsible for the fire, which disrupted the ritual. Mark confessed, saying, "Father, I initially wanted to go through with it out of my own rage, but when it came time to harm the child, I couldn't bring myself to do it." The tantric replied, The malevolent spirit that I summoned to destroy the child has tasted human blood for the first time. Now, no matter what you do, it won't stop until it finishes its task." This led to a heated argument between Mark and the tantric. Eventually, Mark told him to leave the village, saying that he could no longer stay there. Mark called a village council and announced that the tantric had 2 days to leave. However, after this meeting, strange things began happening to everyone who attended, including Mark and George. People started experiencing terrible nightmares and became extremely frightened. Some fell ill and even became paralyzed without explanation. One person's face suddenly became crooked, and another's hand became completely paralyzed. When these things started happening, the tantric warned, "If you try to force me out of here, you'll face even more harm. I'll leave when the time is right, and if no one disturbs me, I won't disturb anyone else." This terrified the villagers. The whole village became eerily quiet, and everyone was tense. People grew angry at Mark, and he faced a lot of humiliation. Mark, feeling cornered, started plotting to kill the tantric. He secretly made plans with a few villagers to murder him. Meanwhile, Mark could no longer live in his own house because of the strange and terrifying sounds at night. He, too, was becoming afraid. One night, when they approached the tantric's house, they saw 3 or 4 human-like figures floating around it, glaring at them with big, red, menacing eyes. This sight terrified everyone, and no one had the courage to go forward. They realized they didn't want to harm anyone, but Mark felt deeply remorseful. Mark began to regret his decisions. He thought about how the villagers used to respect him, but now, because of him, they were suffering. He couldn't accept that anymore. Eventually, Mark confessed everything to his brother, George, admitting that he had brought the tantric into the village and that he had planned to kill George's child. Later, one day, George's child went to the river for a bath with his mother and some other people. The water was shallow, not deep enough for anyone to drown. George's wife left the child in the shallow water while she washed some clothes. At one point, she felt something brush against her leg, and she thought it might be a big fish caught in the clothes. She ducked her head underwater for about 6 to 7 seconds to see what it was, but when she resurfaced, the child was gone. Everyone searched for the child, but they couldn't find him anywhere. Meanwhile, the tantric had been missing for 3 days. No one could find him, and his house was locked from the outside. No one dared to enter his room. 3 days later, the child's body was found in the same spot where he had been standing by the river, but there was not a single drop of blood left in his body. This terrified the entire village, and they became convinced that it was the work of the tantric. The strangest part was that when George brought the child's body home, George's house was a bit far from Mark's house. They found the tantric sitting in George's yard. Mark was furious, but didn't say anything at first. After the child was buried, Mark made up his mind to kill the tantric that very night. He felt he had nothing left to lose and didn't want anyone else to suffer because of him. Late at night, Mark grabbed a bamboo stick and snuck into the tantric's room with the intention of killing him. When Mark entered the tantric's room, he was shocked. It wasn't a tantric at all. It was actually a demon disguised as the tantric. The demon was horribly twisting a live chicken and drinking its blood. Seeing this, Mark was terrified and ran out of the house, collapsing senseless on the road. The next morning, when people found him, Mark told them everything. This news scared the villagers even more. Mark became very ill after the incident and had to be hospitalized. But something even stranger happened at the hospital. One night, the hospital guard saw Mark floating in the air, as if he was being carried somewhere. The guard was so frightened that he became senseless. Although no one else saw it, the guard told everyone the next morning. The villagers then searched for Mark, but couldn't find him. When they reached Mark's house, they discovered something horrifying. There was a large coconut tree in front of his house, the tallest in the village, which no one dared to climb. There, hanging from the tree, was Mark's dead body. The villagers were unable to process what had happened. Following this event, the villagers gathered all the prominent healers and shamans in the area. They decided that no one could live in the surrounding region anymore because the demon, who mainly stayed by the river to feed on fish, had developed a taste for human blood. They feared the demon would start harming the village's children, and not just children, but adults as well. Afterward, the village became abandoned for many years. This is an old story, and a lot of details were skipped because the person telling me this was afraid, and there were personal aspects to the story as well. Mark's house and the surrounding area were eventually flattened and turned into a rice field. For years, no crops were grown there, but the strangest thing is that, even after 30 to 35 years, no one dares to cultivate that land. Although Mark and George's descendants no longer see the demon, there are still dead animals, chickens, ducks, and birds with broken heads and organs spilling out, found in that area. Now, someone is planning to do something with that land and has consulted many shamans to see if the land can be purified. They are also considering selling the land or finding some other use for it. That's the story. I don't know how you feel about it, but thank you for staying with us this long. If you'd like to stay updated about this YouTube channel, please subscribe. We hope to walk this journey together. That's it for today. Stay well, stay healthy, and most importantly, stay with Shadows of the Unknown USA.